The portrait had hung in our hallway for 26 years, and I had walked past it 10,000 times without ever really seeing it. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I saw it. My mother on her wedding day, 26 years younger, radiant in white, laughing at something my father had said, had her left hand pressed flat against the small of her back. And in that hand, half hidden by the fall of her lace sleeve, was a thin white stick. I knew what it was before I knew what it was, because I had held one myself once, in a bathroom at 3 in the morning, watching 2 lines bloom like a bruise. A pregnancy test. My mother was holding a positive pregnancy test behind her back in her own wedding portrait. If stories like this stay with you, consider subscribing. I tell the ones that don't let go. And tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. I had been digitizing the old photographs. That was my job, or half of it. I was a photographer, and the other half was the part where I went through my dead mother's boxes because my father could not bring himself to open them. 3 years she'd been gone, and the boxes sat in the spare room like furniture nobody was allowed to move. I had started with the photographs because they were the easiest. Then I reached the wedding album, and I scanned the portrait, and I zoomed in to check the focus, and that was when I saw the stick in her hand. I stood there in the hallway with my own hand over my mouth. The floorboard squeaked under my foot, the way it always did, and I thought about how many times I had heard that squeak as a child, running to the kitchen, running to the door, running to my father's arms. My father. Daniel. The man who taught me to change a tire before I could reach the pedals. The man whose coffee maker in the shop made coffee that tasted like burnt toast and who drank it anyway, every morning, for 30 years. The man who cried at my high school graduation and then pretended he had something in his eye, and I let him pretend, because that was the deal we had. I looked at the portrait again. The dates were the problem. The wedding was in May. I was born in December. Everyone always said I was early, a small baby, a surprise, a miracle. My mother used to tell the story with a laugh, the way you tell a story you love. She couldn't wait to meet us. She came early and she's been in a hurry ever since. 7 months. I had never done the math. I had never needed to. I called my father. He was at the shop, and I could hear the air compressor in the background, and the radio, and the sound of him wiping his hands on a rag. Dad, I said. I need you to come home. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I need to show you something. He was there in 20 minutes. He came through the door with his work boots on, and I could see the line of grease under his thumbnail, and the way he looked at me first, the way he always looked at me first, checking, the way a man checks the thing he loves most in the world. He was wearing the flannel shirt my mother had bought him the Christmas before she got sick, and he was still wearing it, 3 years later, because he had never once thrown anything of hers away. I pointed at the portrait. Tell me what you see. He looked at it the way he always did, a quick glance, a fond one, the way you look at a photograph you have seen 1,000 times and love every time. Your mother. Best day of my life. Her hand, Dad. Her left hand. Behind her back. He stepped closer. He squinted. He was a man who could hear an engine misfire from across a parking lot, but he had never once looked at his own wedding portrait closely enough to see his bride hiding something behind her back. I watched his face change. I watched the color drain out of it in real time. Is that, he said. He didn't finish. It's a pregnancy test, Dad. He didn't say anything for a long time. The hallway clock ticked. The house made its usual sounds, the refrigerator, the settling of the floorboards, the wind against the window, and I thought about how strange it was that the world kept making ordinary sounds while something enormous was happening in the air between us. She was pregnant, he said finally. At our wedding. She was pregnant and she never told me she was holding it. She told me that night. At the reception. She pulled me into the coachroom and she put my hand on her stomach and she said, "We're having a baby." I remember her face. I remember the exact look on her face. I could draw it. "Dad," I said. I was born in December. 7 months after your wedding. He stared at me. Everyone always said I was early, I said. But what if I wasn't early, Dad? What if I was on time? What if I was already there, at the wedding? I watched him do the math. I watched it land. I watched the man who had raised me for 26 years understand, in the space of a single breath, that the daughter he loved might not be his. Don't, he said. Maya. Don't. I have to know. No, he said. You don't. You don't have to know anything. She was your mother. I'm your father. That's all there is. But his voice cracked on the word father, and I knew he had already done the math, and I knew he would never know it. And I knew something else, something I didn't say out loud, for my mother was a nurse. She had spent her whole adult life reading blood work and charts and dates. If she had been pregnant at her own wedding, she would have known exactly what 7 months meant. She would have known before anyone else in the world. So the question wasn't whether I was early. The question was what my mother had known, and when she had known it, and what she had done with it. The boxes were in the spare room. My father wouldn't go in there, so I went in there. I went in there the way you go into cold water, all at once, before you can think about it. The boxes were labeled in my mother's handwriting, the handwriting I would recognize anywhere, Christmas. Photos. Maya. Baby stuff. Kitchen. Important. Important. That box was the one. It was a show box, actually, a show box from a pair of boots she'd loved, and I remembered her wearing those boots, remembered the sound of them on the porch. I sat down on the floor of the spare room and I opened it. Inside, her wedding ring, which my father had never been able to look at. A lock of hair in a little envelope. My hospital bracelet, the cracked plastic one from the day I was born, with my name on it, Maya, and the date, and the time. A dried flower from her bouquet, pressed flat and brown, still holding its shape. A photograph of her and my father at the shop, both of them young and covered in grease, laughing. And a small white object wrapped in tissue paper. I unwrapped it. It was the pregnancy test. The same kind of stick I had seen in the portrait, held behind her back. She had kept it. She had kept the actual test, wrapped in tissue paper, in a box labeled important, for 26 years. And under the test, at the very bottom of the box, was a journal. A plain black journal with a worn spine. I had never seen it before in my life. I didn't open it right away. I sat there with the test in my hand and the journal in my lap, and I thought about my mother. I thought about her hands. She had good hands, steady hands, nurse's hands. I thought about the way she smelled like soap and the shop at the same time, because she came home from the hospital and hugged my father and got grease on her scrubs and didn't care. I thought about the last year, when she got sick, and how she had still made my father's coffee every morning until she physically couldn't, and how he had stood in the kitchen and cried over a coffee maker. I opened the journal. The first entry was dated the night before her wedding. Her handwriting was excited, almost messy, the way you write when you can't get the words out fast enough. I took the test this morning in the hotel bathroom. 2 lines. I sat on the floor and cried and laughed at the same time. I wanted to call Daniel immediately, but I wanted to tell him at the wedding, in front of everyone, in the perfect moment. I've been carrying it around all day like it's made of glass. I hid it behind my back during the portrait because I couldn't let go of it. I know that sounds crazy. It's the most important thing I've ever held and I couldn't put it down. Tomorrow I marry the best man I've ever known and we're going to be a family. I read it twice. Then I kept reading because the journal went on. Years of it. Not every day, she wasn't a daily writer. She wrote when something mattered. There were entries about me learning to walk, about my father's shop nearly going under and how he worked double shifts and never complained, about the house, about the garden she planted that never grew because the soil was bad and how she planted it anyway every spring. And then there was an entry dated when I was 15. The handwriting was different. Careful. The handwriting of someone writing something she was afraid of. Today I took Maya to the hospital for her appendix. Routine. She was so brave. They needed blood and they ran the panel and I looked at the results the way I've looked at 1,000 results and my hands went cold. Maya is B positive. Daniel is O positive. I am a positive. An O and an A cannot make a B. I know this the way I know my own name. I have known it since nursing school. I stood in that hallway with my daughter's blood work in my hand and I understood, all at once, everything I had spent 15 years not understanding. I did the dates. I did them over and over, standing there, and they came out the same every time. The wedding was in May. Maya was born in December. I told myself for 15 years that she was early. But I knew. I think I always knew, somewhere underneath, and I built a wall over it and I never looked at it. There was one night, before Daniel. One night I have spent my whole life trying to forget, with Graham, before he left town, before I ever really knew Daniel, before any of it. I convinced myself it meant nothing. I convinced myself the baby was Daniel's because I wanted it to be Daniel's with my whole heart. And now I know it wasn't. I have to tell him. I have to. He deserves to know. I'm going to tell him tonight. I'm going to sit him down and tell him the truth and whatever happens, happens. He's the best man I've ever known. He deserves the truth. I turned the page. The next entry was dated the following week. I didn't tell him. I wrote the words 100 times and I couldn't say them. I stood in the kitchen and watched him fix the garbage disposal and I thought about how he would look at me after I told him, and I couldn't bear it. I know that makes me a coward. I know it. But I also know this, he is Maya's father. Not because of blood. Because of everything. Because he held her when she was born and he cried. Because he taught her to ride a bike and to change a tire and to stand up for herself. Because when she gets scared she calls him, and he answers. Blood is the smallest part of it. I am not going to take her father away from her to ease my own conscience. I am going to carry this alone, the way I carried that test behind my back at my own wedding. I have been hiding a truth behind my back for 15 years. I suppose I will hide it for the rest of my life. I hope God forgives me. I hope Daniel forgives me. I hope Maya never has to know. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the journal and I sat on the floor of the spare room with my mother's secret in my hands, and I understood something that changed the shape of everything I had ever believed about my life. My mother hadn't been hiding a secret from us. She had been hiding a wound for us. I went downstairs. My father was in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his back to me, not moving. He hadn't made coffee. He never didn't make coffee. I stood in the doorway and I watched his shoulders, and I knew he had been standing there since I went upstairs, not moving, because he didn't know what to do with his hands anymore. Dad, I said. He didn't turn around. I found her journal, I said. She knew. She found out when I was 15. My blood type, she did the math. She never told you because she didn't want to take me away from you. She wrote it all down. She called you the best man she ever knew. She said blood is the smallest part of it. He turned around then. His face was wrecked. He had been crying, and he wasn't hiding it, and I had never seen my father cry without hiding it, not once, not even at my mother's funeral, where he had stood like a post and shaken hands like a man at a business meeting. She knew, he said. It wasn't a question. She knew for 11 years, I said. She carried it alone. She wrote that she was hiding a truth behind her back, the way she hid that test in the portrait. He looked past me, down the hall, at the portrait. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "Who was it, Maya?" "I don't know." She didn't write his name. She just wrote Graham. She said he left town before she ever really knew you. My father went very still. I had seen him go still like that exactly once before, the time a man came into the shop and threatened him, and my father had gone still, and the man had left. It was the stillness of a man doing arithmetic in his head. "Graham," he said. "You knew him." "Graham was my partner," he said. "We built the shop together. We were best friends since we were kids. He left town the spring before I married your mother. Just left. Sold me his half for almost nothing. Said he had to get out. I never understood it. I never understood why he left like that, why he never came back, why he never even called." He looked at me, and I watched the last piece of it click into place behind his eyes. "He left because of her," I said. "He left because he knew." My father sat down at the kitchen table. He sat down the way a man sits down when his legs have stopped working. "I thought he was my best friend," he said. "I stood up at his wedding, no. I stood up at my own wedding, and he wasn't there. He sent a card. He sent a card and a set of wrenches and he never came back. Dad. I raised another man's child," he said. "I raised Graham's child for 26 years, and I loved every second of it, and I would do it again, and I don't know if that makes me a fool or a father." "It makes you my father," I said. "That's all it makes you." He looked at me. He looked at me the way he had looked at me my whole life, checking, loving, and for the first time I saw something else in it, fear. The man who had never been afraid of anything in his life was afraid of me. "You're not going to leave," he said. It wasn't a question, but it was. It was the most desperate question he had ever asked. "Dad," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm your daughter. I've always been your daughter. That's not going to change because of a blood test." He didn't answer. He just nodded, and I could see he didn't believe me, and I could see he was trying to be brave about it, and I could see that the fear was going to live in him now, in the space where the truth used to be. That was the week I learned that knowing the truth and believing it are two different things. I found Graham the way you find anyone now. I typed his name into a search bar and the internet did the rest. Graham Whitfield. He was rich. He owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states, and he was in the business magazines, and he had a house with a lawn like a golf course, and he had never married, and he had no children. There were photographs of him at charity galas, smiling, shaking hands. He looked like a man who had done very well for himself and was trying to look like he deserved it. I stared at his face on my laptop screen, and I tried to feel something, and I couldn't. This was the man who had left my mother before she married my father. This was the man whose blood ran in my veins. And I felt nothing but a kind of cold curiosity, the way you feel looking at a photograph of a stranger who happens to look like you. I didn't tell my father I was looking. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it, the way you pick at a scab, telling yourself you'll stop. And then, 2 weeks later, Graham Whitfield walked into my father's shop. I was there because my father had called me, the way he called me sometimes, just to hear my voice, just to check. I was standing at the counter when the door opened and a man came in wearing a suit that cost more than my father's truck. He was older than his photographs, grayer, but it was him. I knew it was him the way you know a face you've been staring at on a screen for 2 weeks. He looked at me. And I watched his face do the same thing my father's face had done in the hallway, the color draining, the arithmetic, the landing. "Maya," he said. My father came out of the back, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw Graham, and he stopped. The two of them stood there, 26 years apart, in the shop they had built together, and neither of them said a word. "You have my daughter," Graham said finally. It was the first thing he ever said to me. My father didn't move. "She's not your daughter," he said. "She's never been your daughter. You left?" "I know," Graham said. "I know what I did." "Then why are you here?" Graham looked at me. There was something in his face I didn't want to look at, hunger, maybe, or grief, or both. "Because I found out," he said. "I saw her photograph. I was at a wedding, and the photographer was, I saw her name. Maya. And I did the math, and I knew. I've known for 2 weeks, and I couldn't not come. You did the math, my father said. 26 years, and you did the math in 2 weeks. I did the math in 2 seconds, standing in my own hallway, and I've been doing it every night since. I'm not here to take anything from you, Daniel. You already took something from me, my father said. You took the truth. You left me to raise your child without knowing, and you left her to raise it alone, and you never came back, and now you show up in a suit, 26 years later, and you want, what? What do you want? I want to know her, Graham said. I've never had anyone. I've never had a family. I've spent my whole life alone, and I deserve. You don't deserve anything, my father said. His voice was very quiet. You left a pregnant woman. You left your best friend. You left a baby you never met. You don't get to show up at the end and call yourself a father. You get to live with what you did. Graham stood there. I watched him, and I watched my father, and I understood that I was standing in the middle of something that had been building for 26 years, something that had started with a pregnancy test hidden behind a bride's back. I'm not here to fight you, Graham said. I'm here to offer her something. I have money. I have connections. I can give her a gallery, a career, a future. I can give her what I should have given her mother. My father didn't answer. He just looked at me. And I knew, in that look, that he was giving me the choice. He was terrified, and he was giving me the choice, because that was the kind of man he was. Can I talk to you? I said to Graham. Alone. We went outside. It was cold, and the wind was coming off the highway, and Graham stood there in his expensive coat and looked at me like I was a door he had been knocking on for 26 years. You knew, I said. You knew she was pregnant. That's why you left. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she told me the night before I left. She said she was going to tell Daniel, and she wanted me to know first, because she thought I deserved to know. I was 24 years old. I was terrified. I thought if I stayed, I would ruin everything. I thought she would be better off without me. I thought Daniel would be better off. I told myself I was doing the noble thing. You told yourself that, I said. Yes. And you believed it. He looked at me. No, he said. I've never believed it. I've known for 26 years that I ran. I've known that I left her to carry it alone. I've known that I left my best friend to raise my child. I've known it every single day, and I've never done anything about it, and I don't know how to make that right. I don't know if there's a way to make it right. But I'm here now. And I want to know my daughter. You don't get to call me that, I said. I know. You don't get to show up with money and a suit and pretend that makes you a father. I know. You left her, I said. You left my mother to carry the whole thing alone. She carried it for 11 years after she found out the truth. She carried it to her grave. She wrote in her journal that she was hiding a truth behind her back, the way she hid that test in her wedding portrait. And you were out there, rich, at galas, shaking hands, while she was hiding a truth behind her back so her daughter could keep her father. Graham's face crumpled. I watched it happen, and I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt something else. I felt the cold, clean thing you feel when you finally say the truth out loud and it lands exactly where it needed to land. She's gone, he said. I never got to know her. I never got to tell her I was sorry. You don't get to tell her now, I said. You don't get to make it right with her. You only get to make it right with the people who are still here. And I'm telling you, the way she would have told you if she could, I have a father. His name is Daniel. He taught me to change a tire. He came to every recital. He cried at my graduation and pretended he had something in his eye, and I let him pretend, because that's the deal we have. He's the man who stayed. You're the man who left. And that's the whole difference. Graham stood there in the cold with his expensive coat and his empty hands. I could give you everything, he said. I could give you a life you've never imagined. I already have a life, I said. I have a father who loves me. I have a mother who loved me enough to carry a secret to her grave so I could keep him. You can't give me that. Nobody can. He didn't have anything to say to that. He stood there, and I watched the money and the suit and the 26 years of loneliness collapse into a small, quiet, ordinary man who had made one terrible choice and never once had the courage to undo it. Can I at least, he said. Can I at least write to her? To you? You can do whatever you want, I said. But I'm not going to pretend you're my father. I'm not going to pretend you're part of my family. You're the man who ran. And I'm going to go inside now and make my father a cup of coffee, because he's been standing in there afraid all week that I was going to leave him, and he's the only father I've ever had, and I'm not going to let him stand there afraid for one more minute. I went back inside. My father was standing at the counter, and he hadn't moved, and I could see the fear in his face, the fear he had been carrying all week, the fear that had been living in him since the moment he saw the test in the portrait. He's gone, I said. He nodded. He didn't ask what I'd said. He didn't ask what I'd decided. He just stood there, waiting, the way he had waited for me my whole life, checking, loving, afraid. Dad, I said. I need you to hear me. I know you've been standing in this kitchen all week thinking I was going to leave. I'm not. I'm never going to leave. You're my father. Not because of blood. Because of everything. Because you held me when I was born and you cried. Because you taught me to ride a bike and to change a tire and to stand up for myself. Because when I get scared, I call you, and you answer. Blood is the smallest part of it. She knew that. I know that now. And I need you to know it too. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he walked over to the coffee maker and he made 2 cups of coffee, the way he had done every morning of my life, and he handed me one, and he said, I know. And I could see, in the way he said it, that he was starting to believe it. Not all the way. Not yet. But starting. That was 3 months ago. Graham writes to me sometimes. I read the letters, and then I put them in a box, the way my mother kept the test in a box labeled important. I don't know if I'll ever open the box again. I don't know if I'll ever answer. I don't know if I'm ready to decide what he is to me. Maybe he's just the man who ran. Maybe he's something else. I don't know yet, and I've decided that's allowed. My father and I took the portrait down last week. Not because we don't want to see it, because we wanted to clean the glass, and because I wanted to look at it properly, one more time, with everything I know now. We stood in the hallway, the 2 of us, and we looked at my mother on her wedding day, radiant in white, laughing at something my father had said, her left hand pressed flat against the small of her back. Look at her, my father said. She's hiding it. She's hiding the most important thing in the world behind her back, and she's laughing. She wasn't hiding it from you, I said. She was hiding it for us. She was holding the truth the way you hold a child's hand when you cross a street, so nobody could see how afraid she was. He looked at me. You really believe that? I do, I said. I have to. Because it's the only version of her that makes sense. She loved us. She loved us enough to carry it alone. She loved us enough to hide a truth behind her back for the rest of her life so we could keep each other. We hung the portrait back up. The floorboard squeaked under my foot, the way it always did, and I thought about how many times I had heard that squeak as a child, running to the kitchen, running to the door, running to my father's arms. And I thought about how my mother had stood in this same hallway, 26 years ago, holding a positive pregnancy test behind her back, terrified and thrilled, hiding the most important thing in the world so she could tell the man she loved in the perfect moment. She never got the perfect moment. But she got the life. She got the man, and the child, and the house with the squeaky floorboard, and the coffee maker that made burnt coffee, and the garden that never grew because the soil was bad, and she planted it anyway, every spring, for 26 years. That's what I think about when I look at the portrait now. Not the secret. Not the math. Not the blood type or the date or the man who ran. I think about her hand, pressed flat against the small of her back, holding the truth the way you hold a child's hand when you cross a street. I think about what it means to love someone enough to carry a secret for them. I think about what it means to be loved like that. And I wonder, every single day, whether my mother's silence was a betrayal or the bravest love I will ever know. So I'll ask you the same thing I keep asking myself: if you found out the man who raised you wasn't your father, would you want the truth? Or would you rather keep the life you had? And if you were my mother, standing at your own wedding with the most important secret of your life in your hand, would you hide it behind your back, or would you set it down in front of everyone and let the truth fall where it falls?